And the realization is three things. One is the C-suite people have no idea what all the programs are in their company that already exist. They have no idea what they're spending on them. And they have no vision of what it would benefit them to pull them all together. So what we've done is we've created this thing called a recognition inventory. Send this out to all your divisions, depends how big the company is.
Yeah.
Find out what's being done. We're doing service awards on a corporate level, but there's a safety program over here in this division that's really effective, but no one else is using it because they created it 12 years ago. And then there's this onboarding program over here that's really cool, but nobody else knows about it. And then there's this, program for training of this, and you find all these loose, disjointed pieces. We pull them together, create best practices, and then roll it out to everybody on a technology platform, spending all this money. And like you had said, is it worth it? Well, nobody knows. There's no way to measure it. Well, we now.
Yeah, if you don't measure anything, right?
Well, it's hard to measure it because the question is, if it's working over there, what would happen if it worked everywhere? Well, they don't have the resources to make it work everywhere. We'll create that resource. And so now we're rolling out a program that everybody's singing out of the same hymn book. The measurement is now there. We can trade benchmark and say how much did turnover improve based on applying this. And then my personal part of it, the reason I can reach over to the consulting training part is I wrote a book about it in 2010 because I was so frustrated with why people didn't perform. And so I came at it from an engineering view. Now, are you familiar with Sneha Mandala from India? Have you heard of her?
No, not at all. Please.
Check it out. She's really slick. And her story, she has a TED Talk. And she reached out to me similar to the way you did from LinkedIn. She's about 30 years old, young mom, has a child. She came from India, got her master's degree in industrial engineering in Chicago, went to work for Amazon installing robotics in their plants. Thought she had hit the jackpot, the American dream. Her parents were so proud, and she hated it. And the reason she hated it is all the employees hated her because they thought she was replacing them with robots. And so instead of quitting and fretting and giving up, she started to create internal programs at Amazon on how to teach employees how to increase their skill set to avoid being replaced by the robots. And she found that she just loved it. So it's a little bit of your kind of story of bouncing around, found this niche, and now she's this major consultant, speaker, trainer. The challenge is the people that come from the more academic side, like Mike Robbins is a big speaker out of San Francisco, Patrick Lencioni, Bob Nelson, 1001 Ways, all these guys. I've met a number of them now because I've started reaching out to them. Sarah McVallen, I have a call with her next week. But I realize that they all have the story of what you should do, but they don't get to the how you should do it part. They don't have logistics. They just had, yeah, you ought to do that. And so they're reaching out to these companies that have no idea how to actually fix it once they give them the message. Well, I'm the guy that can take that message and say, let's do an inventory, let's pull it all together. And got that same problem because that's how companies grow. Betty over here in training has come up with this little program and hires a vendor and is giving out gift cards and nobody knows it, And so when we bring them together, it's very interesting logistics. Because to me, even the how to do messages I've heard are not very detailed. I met a guy named Dan Berger, and it's spelled Dan, but it's pronounced Don. He's an Israeli American. And he created a software company for the hospitality industry that would help create getaway type meetings. And it was a very sophisticated software that would detail everything from the size of the room, the fire codes, setting up the entire meeting. And it was really neat. And he sold it for $100 million to a Sea Event company and retired up to Boise, Idaho. And now he's publishing a book called Quest, which is his story of belonging because he was adopted and then he immigrated when he was 9 years old to America. So he has this long story of not feeling like he belonged on a personal level, but he leads it up to how do you create belonging in the workplace, which is how we met. And he does just like everyone else. He leads them right up to the end of the diving board and says, yeah, you ought to do these things and tell people you appreciate them and tell them you care and no logistics. And so my analogy is, you're going to convince them to jump. Well, my team's down in the pool teaching swim lessons, and so we'll take it from here. And so he's creating these event centers. The first one's going to be in Boise, and it's like a small little boutique hotel with about a dozen rooms and a big conference center and all the technology. So they will create these little getaway events for executives, but they'll also plan all their entertainment in the community. So he puts them in historic districts in unique cities. And then here's where you're going to go to dinner, and you can go snowboarding in the afternoon, and we can set up the whole meeting for you in this really unique breakout type place. And he thinks it's a niche, particularly now since COVID. A lot of people are working remote. How do you get your executive team together? Because the best decisions are made by small groups.
Yeah.
And so my hope with Dan is bring me in as a resource for these groups when they're talking about recognition, engagement, retention. How do we get and keep good people? Well, you need a system. You don't just talk about it. The problem is, and you've probably seen this too, managers are not inherently good at this. When I worked in engineering, I saw guys that could run an engine lathe really well, but if you made them the lead man over a group of engine lathe operators, they weren't necessarily very good at that. It's a whole different skill set. And so when you put in a program and say you should give recognition to your people using these tools, not everybody goes, yeah, great, I'm all over it. I'm going to do it consistently every week. They don't care. They don't get it. They don't engage in it. They don't see a value in it. And so a lot of what we do is create the training tool to launch it and say, hey, manager, if you have a meaningful employee touch point on average once a month with every employee, you're going to have engagement. You're going to have people that think you like them and care about them. And my personal message has always been, you've got to appreciate them before you recognize them. You got to treat them like you care about them as a person before you care about them as a worker. Otherwise, they're just a rat in the maze. And that's the biggest problem with autocratic old school companies is they hire you, here's your job, I'm going to pay you, get to work. And we don't really care about your outside life. And so one of the things I learned from Don is it's very interesting when you find out what people do outside of work. Oftentimes it's not what you would think. And I'm a perfect example. I'm 69 years old, but I'm playing in a rock band and I have a $60,000 custom motorcycle. It's like, oh, okay, tell me more. That's cool. So if you find out as a manager, your employees, what I recommend is know their spouse and their kids' names. Even if you have to write it down and have notes, but that's a good personal thing to know about any employee. And then know at least one thing that's unique to them. Maybe they cook, maybe they camp, maybe they lead a Boy Scout troop. Maybe they play in a band. Maybe they do something. Maybe they're fishing. They won a bass tournament. You would be amazed how engaging that is because that's definitely not about work. And so I've now created a webinar and a speaking keynote based on this transition from the what to do to the how to do. Because what I realized is guys like the Mike Robbinses of the world that are talking to big companies, they're very scared to bring in a sales guy. And this as well as anybody. Here comes the sales guy to sell you some stuff. And there goes my reputation because now all this talking I've done is to set you up for me to sell you something. And so the key to this with Sneha and with Sarah is how do we smoothly make the transition where we're not selling it, we're offering the logical next step and they're going, bring it on. I want to know how to do this. And then I come in and I'm pretty low key and I go, what are you doing now? What would you like to do better? Here's how we could do that. Here's what it costs. Let me know if you want to do it. And those are the sales. I'm one of those guys that believes you never close a sale. The sale just happens. You assume you're offering a better thing, and if they like it, they get it. And there's none of the old school sales technique.
Yeah.
And it's worked very well for me. But the challenge is, since COVID and all, how do I get these top HR people on the phone? How do I get them? Because again, most of them don't know they even have the problem. They may go to bid and say, we're going to bid out our service award program. We want to see an RFP on service award. Well, what are you doing for safety? What are you doing for peer-to-peer? Oh, well, I don't know. Susie does that. Well, what if we pull it all together? Oh, you can do that. And so it's kind of, we're inventing something that they sort of think it would be good, but nobody believes you can really do it. And now Incentive Services, my partner, has done it for some of the biggest and best companies in the country, in the US. But we also work in Canada and 86 other countries now. And so it's very fun from a logistics thing to say, what kind of culture do you have? What do your executives think of this? We need to engage the top leaders, because if they're not engaged, the employees aren't going to believe you mean it. And so there's this whole process. And then the best thing about Incentive Services as a partner, and we have a huge bench. So when we bring in for a larger company, they'll have an account manager for their day-to-day. They'll have an account director that overseeing strategy. And then we have a business development team that really comes in and talks big picture. And so they feel like, wow, you've got a great team of people building and supporting and running this program and taking it off our desk. Because that's the other thing, is when companies grow, they outgrow their capability to do this manually. And I have,
what you do is technology, right? It is pulling together many things that without the technology, most people wouldn't have had the vision or the brain to see exactly how it all.
Because that's another unique part of my story. When I got out of college as an industrial engineer, I passed up on an offer to be a sales engineer for GE in their marine division. But I would have worked in, Newport News, making oil tankers and providing all the electronics. And I thought that would have been so cool. Probably would have gotten to work for Jack Welch, fork in the road, who knew? I ended up working for Garrett Turbine Engine, making APUs for jets, which is still cool.
Yeah.
But it ended up getting me the information that brought me to where I am today, which who knows where I'd have been if I went into sales right away.
Yeah.
So you never know. You're the same thing.
No.
You have a story of bouncing around to things you never knew, and it changes your life.
Yeah. Well, I always knew I was going to be in sales, because that was the only thing I could do was somewhat talk. I can't use my hands for anything, and so I just knew that sales would be something that I was in probably at the age of 15 or 16.
I probably did, but I didn't. I came from a family that didn't make it sound like a good career. They kind of talked me away from that. But it's funny, my wife brought it up the other day. When I was in high school, I built a lamp with my dad out of old car parts. We welded up like a wheel and some brake drums and valves and pistons, and it turned it into a lamp, wired it up. And there was an article from this local paper. It goes, John Schaefer built this lamp. John, what are you going to do with the lamp? I go, I think I might sell it. Maybe I'll go into the lamp business. And what's funny is we went to a home and garden, one of those seasonal shows, and there is a booth of a guy that makes all kinds of cool stuff out of old car parts, animals and lamps and all kinds of unique things out of old pistons and valves. I go, I could have been that, but I just never went that way. But I very quickly realized that the structure of being a clock punching operator guy working in a factory day to day, that wasn't my style. And so I almost went into sales with Garrett. I had another buddy that was in IE that went into their sales thing. And for some reason, I didn't go that way. I got frustrated because I was ahead of my time trying to improve the production line. I was really fascinated by the fact that certain guys were much more productive than other guys on the same machines. And so I got into trying to figure that out. And it was what brought me into this industry. But some people just care and some people just don't. And doesn't mean they're not smart. So we had a guy on the night shift. We had a very unique machine that would cut little slots between every turbine blade into the hub. And it was the very specific cut depth because it would allow the turbine wheel to expand in heat and speed and not blow up. So it was very critical step, but it was near the end of the build. So if you scrapped the part, it was very expensive. And so they had this little electrode that would go in there and cut. It was like almost burned it in under oil. Cool machine. But they'd have to change out that little brass electrode when it burned up. And then they'd have to remike it and reset it, which is a chance to scrap it. It was a waste of time. And so the night shift guy had figured out how to get over 20 cuts per electrode. By the way, he set the machine up. The day shift was getting 6 or 7 cuts per electrode. That's a huge difference. Mm-hmm. So I stayed late, went in, talked to the night shift guy. He would not tell me how he did it. He just laughed at me, sipping coffees, making his rate, reading the paper. I don't know, just kind of, it's all by feel, I just kind of have a touch for the machine. And he wouldn't tell me. Same thing with the engine lathe guys. They just wouldn't quite tell me how many passes it took to make this cut because they're all patented. Mm-hmm. And I realized that's our fault. That's not their fault. That's management's fault for not. I said, because it came to me right away. What if we incented all 3 shifts to make those parts the best they could and share that information, and they all get a bonus on how much they reduce scrap and setup time? We can measure those. Nobody wanted to do it. I did all the research. We could have saved $1 million a year. And this was back in the 80s. I go, guys, we could save $1 million just by incenting these 3 shifts to work more effectively together. Oh, well, I can't do that. And so I literally just quit. And so that was my early story, but I ended up writing a book about it because I go, how can this be? And it's certainly not unique to that company.
Oh yeah, no, knowledge sharing is something that, it really is amazing that in some cases people hoard the knowledge and they think it's for job security, right? And it really should be, there always should be, the company should always be the main focus, right? How do you make things more productive, more efficient, give them the opportunity to make more money? And when you hoard information or hoard secrets, for personal gain or perceived personal gain, you're really not doing any favors to anybody.
Right, but you're not born thinking that way. The company culture drives you to think that way. And I think part of the problem, and I've talked to leaders about this, if you own the company or you have a big stock option in the company, you think differently about it. If you're just an employee working on the clock, what do you care? So the key to an incentive program and the key to companies that really engage and keep good people is what's in it for me? Make me a part of it, and then I will automatically feel like doing things. So it's a combination of you've got to make them know you care about them as human beings first. They got to like you and trust you. And once they do, then they'll start listening to things you want to achieve and want to help you do it as long as it makes sense. Now, if you pat them on the head and say, thanks for your help, sooner or later, they're going to go, I'm doing all this more creative work. I'm giving 110%. The company's making more and more profit. Can I have a little piece of that? And some of that, you can get a raise every now and then, but a very minimal incentive opportunity drives people a long way because they feel like I'm getting a little piece of that action for going above and beyond. What else can I do to earn some more of these points? And so that's where the best programs really flourish, is now you've got people, and it seems silly. It's like, well, I did something and I got a coupon and it's worth $10 worth of points. Well, but if that happens 20 times a year, all of a sudden you got $200 or $300 in your bank. You want to buy your kid a mountain bike. You want to go on a trip. You start building up this bank of points from all these different little touches, and it becomes a significant thank you and an appreciation. And as long as it's done in a way that they know you care, you're not just buying them off. And that's the problem we run into with cash and gift cards. If people are
Yeah.
just doing them willy-nilly, I've run into lots of cases where, yeah, we bought a stack of gift cards. I keep them in my desk. Somebody does something good, I toss them one.
Hmm.
Well, that's not recognition. That's buying them off. That's
Hmm.
cheap and dirty, and they know it.
Hmm.
You know, when you give somebody a gift card in an unorganized way, the feeling is he stopped by Safeway on the way to work and picked up this gift card and gave it to me. You know, it's kind of like grandma giving you $10 for your birthday card. It's nice, but it didn't take a lot of deep thought.
No.
And so there's a lot of psychological communication to this. The other thing it gets into, and this is something Dan Berger's really big on, is the love languages. Are you familiar with that book, The 5 Love Languages?
Yep. Yep.
Not every employee is motivated by the same stuff. You know,
Oh, no.
and not every generation is motivated by the same thing. I'm a baby boomer. You're a baby boomer, I'm guessing. And,
Yep.
you know, we grew up with, tell me what to do. I'll tell you when it's done. I don't need a lot of pats on the head. I don't need you to look over my shoulder. Just, you know, I'll tell you when it's done. Gen Y, not only they want you looking over the shoulder, but they don't mind if you help them out, and they don't mind if the whole team gets recognized for it. They don't like being singled out. Is
Yeah.
that good? Is that bad? No, it's just different. But you need to be aware of it, because if you create a program that insults people or makes them uncomfortable, it ain't going to work. And so a
Yeah.
lot of our discussion is, what's your makeup of employees? There's some tradition. That's why certain companies still give those pins. There'll be employees that, look, I've got a 5-year, a 10-year, a 15 or 20. I want my 25-year pin. Well, don't
Yeah.
get rid of it, but let's add some other things instead. If you don't want a pin, let's give them something else. So you just, but all of that is hard to do yourself. And that's why people don't do it. We come in and we can go, we'll do 6 different options, because our
Mhm.
system will handle that. And so it's
Mhm.
kind of cool. And people go, really? You could do that. And then each division could have a different landing page. Each division could have different images. Oh,
Mhm.
wow, you could do that? Well, sure. All we need is the data broken down by division.
Mhm.
And then we get into who should get reporting. Which level of reporting do you want? We have a thing called manager dashboards now, where every leader goes into their dashboard and it lists all their direct reports and tells you in real time how much recognition did they give or receive. And then you can click on it and literally read the recognition certificates that they gave or that they received. And it reminds you in the next month, everybody that's having an anniversary or birthday on your team
Yeah.
automatically. And so you can go in and predate a birthday e-card that'll show up on their birthday next month. Seems kind of silly, but then you think, wow, I could go in at the end of the month, make sure I don't forget anybody, and a birthday card's going to pop up on their birthday because you reminded me in my dashboard. Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
Because it's not that
Very
managers
simple, but
don't
very
care.
cool. Right.
Yeah, managers they don't not care, but they just don't have time to remember everything. It's a very interesting business, and it's changing fairly quickly. And a lot of this post-COVID now has really put the focus on, how do I get and keep people? Because it
Well,
became a buyer's market, you know, for employees.
yeah, and truthfully, it's funny because a lot of people will say it, that with retention being,
The key is to find companies that really want to develop a culture and are willing to be open to learning. Because then
well,
it's fun.
and yeah, and the key for that to happen, I think, is there's always there's always a percentage of success, right? Like, I'm sure anytime anybody does anything that has anything to do with recognition, there's a scalable amount of success, maybe 1 out of 100, right? Maybe 80 out of 100. But in order for it to really maximize the success level, you really have to have all the stakeholders, the C-level, the executive team need to buy into it, right?
Yeah.
And if that happens, then you're going to see favorable results.
As long as what they buy into is done right, because you could get them all to
Yeah.
buy into it and then put in a program that nobody likes. And so that's
Yeah,
one of the
that's a
things
given,
we're
yeah.
very good at, is let's get them to buy into it and then let's make it really good.
Mhm,
And a
mhm.
lot of times the it is, what do you guys think? It always comes back, in my opinion, to what I call making it real. Do they like you? Do they trust you? Do they believe you? Are you legit? Are you consistent? And if they believe you are, then they're in. Now you have to not screw it up.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so,
true.
and so a lot of it's being flexible. We've got a new initiative. How do we roll that into our platform and make it another way to earn points and to be engaged? And that's, our team does that very well. And that is, I actually did a keynote when I wrote my book back in 2010. And the keynote was really good, but I never used it much. I did a few speeches, and I early on thought, I don't want to make a living as a speaker, being paid by the gig. I like the logistics. I like the problem solving. I like the back end. But it doesn't mean I don't have a good keynote. I just don't want to
Right.
be known for it. So now I've freshened up the keynote. I'm a little bit older, a little wiser, a little more of the elder statesman kind of guy. And I think that I'm going to find some ways to tie my keynote in with people that are doing that front end that can say, well, let me bring on somebody that transitions from what I'm talking about, who understands it, to how to actually achieve it. And I don't think there's anybody in our industry that can do that. Most of the people that work on my end at our logistics came from the scholastic industry. The 25 plus years that I've been involved in recognition incentives, what I've learned is that most companies don't have a well-organized approach. They have a variety of different programs for incentives and gifts and awards. And what we found is if we can pull them all together, not only can we then manage it and track it and help them really see what they're investing and what they're getting for it, but we can also involve a lot better economics of scale. So we oftentimes will save them money, but also give them a program that makes a lot more sense and involves people. The real secret, in my opinion, to recognition is appreciation first. Have people like you, trust you, and believe you really mean it. And then you can recognize them for things that they've actually done and incent them for things you want them to do. And certain parts of it have an ROI component, and certain parts are just a cultural component. But the key is to get everybody singing out of the same hymn book. And we have a lot of fun doing that with our clients, because every company's different, and we have to learn their management style and their culture and build a program custom that fits their needs. And it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome, Don. I think I could talk to you all day. I certainly appreciate your time. Glad that we made this happen. I think that what you're doing is certainly different than anything that I've seen, and I think that there's some real opportunity for you in this space. I would think that there's probably a number of large compensation vendors that should be also speaking with you from a reseller partnership. And then of course the big five consulting firms should know who you are too. So very, very impressive. Love the background, love the story, love talking to you. And if you're wanting to reach out to John or learn more, all of his contact information will be wherever you're reading this. Just look below and you can connect as you want. And I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.